Welcome everyone to Silvera Jewelry School. I'm not Silvera, this is Joe Silvera, and our partner Jen is Parnell Kirkpatrick is not here and she's teaching.
Yeah.
Anyway, welcome. We have these monthly talks every month, except I think one in the last for 3.5 years. And sometimes we have two a month. This month we have two. So next Sunday on the 22nd, same time, same place, we have the new Argentium 940, which just came out in January, and Mark Nelson from Rio Grande is going to be giving us a talk. And then in February, on February 19th, also Sunday at noon, Joe is going to be giving a talk called In a Pickle, all about pickles. So
not pickles, but pickle.
Pickle, I mean.
The pickle.
Yeah, all about pickle. Okay. We will be adding more talks soon. We keep adding them as we are able to finalize everything with the people giving talks. So check it out. And also, at the moment, we are having we've been in Berkeley now for 12 years. We had a school elsewhere for many years, but we're celebrating our 12th anniversary in Berkeley right now, and we have a sale going on. It's supposed to end tonight. But because we're doing the talk today, we will extend it through tomorrow. So those of you who are watching this recording, you have till Monday the 16th at midnight if you want to sign up. There are still some spots left in Bonnie's class, for instance, and there's many other classes as well. So if you haven't checked out our website, do so at silverajewelry.com. And after midnight the 16th, the sale will be done and no more. So if you're watching it later, I'm sorry. We are so honored and happy to have Bonnie with us. Bonnie Bischoff will be teaching for us in May, and we're so happy to have her here to show you what she's been doing for over 30 years with polymer clay. And she and her partner, J.M. Syron, have been creating furniture, lighting, wall art, and jewelry, incorporating polymer clay, wood, and metal. And you are in for such a treat. I've seen the slideshow, and it is amazing. So I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie, and she can introduce herself even more. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, folks. Well, hello. Fasten your seatbelts. I have a lot of pictures to share. It's the easiest way for me to really talk about what we do and just show a little bit of the journey that my husband and I have been on over the years. And a lot of times people just, if you just see the jewelry and you don't understand what came before it, you may not sort of understand the scope of how I think about it. But I've always enjoyed, I love permutations. I love looking at how things can vary, and polymer clay has been this incredible medium for me to use as a mixed medium and to explore so many possibilities. So my brother dubbed me as an idea hamster, and I think I found my ultimate medium in polymer clay in doing that. So I am just going to jump right in and start screen sharing and show you my slideshow here. And I do have some little videos, and we'll have time for questions. We may stop a little bit here and there for questions as we go along. All right, so I'm
sorry, that is one thing I forgot to mention. Please put your questions into the chat, and then at certain times Bonnie will stop and I will ask her questions. Thank you.
Oops. All right, is that working? Anat, is that working? Yes, okay, great. All right, great. Super. Perfect. So all right, just let me know if the sound is weird because I did the optimizing thing. All right, so yes, polymer clay is an art medium. A lot of people think it's a craft medium, but there's so much to it. Well, here I am, Philadelphia Museum of Art Craft Show this very year. we realized it's been about 37, 38 years that JM and I have been working together, having kids, making art, and we're still at it. We have done so much from a range from really complex jewelry that includes metal, all kinds of joining of the polymer clay, really light, sort of fluffy, ethereal things, huge tabletop. This is actually a conference tabletop. And so we've worked this large with the polymer clay. And so that just telling you a little bit, and by the way, that's about 10 years ago. But we, just to take you a little bit on this journey, we really started out making furniture together. My husband started out as a musical instrument maker in the woodworking, making woodwinds. I had been doing woodblock prints. I also was teaching science, so I'm like a science art person. And the first thing we started making furniture together. I was carving surfaces, and I was introduced to polymer clay through The New Clay, which is a book by Nan Roach, still one of my most favorite books. And I started thinking about, could I make tiles? I saw Kathleen Dustin made vessels, and I thought, well, why can't I make tiles? And they're about 1/4 of an inch thick. So this is something we first started doing when we were making the furniture together. And you can see they are just cut and fit into a wooden frame, and there's a sub top below. And I was doing a really basic kind of fractally pattern that using a millefiori technique, and you will see more about this later, but it's sliced pieces of design. It's fired separately and then glued into the furniture, because the furniture has nitrocellulose lacquer. You cannot put a lacquer finish over plastic. They don't get along. I also thought about putting little plugs of polymer clay in, so they're like little dots glued into this wooden veneered coffee table. And we started to realize how fun this was for surface design, how unusual it was. So that's where we really started on our journey. Not long after that, I went to a workshop with Pure Volkus, and she was using polymer clay like a veneer on boxes. And Daniel Peters, her husband, they were doing this together. And I was like, oh, it's not just a tile, it's a flexible veneer. So they are really responsible for helping me turn on the light and see that we could make really thin pieces of polymer and glue them down just like wood veneer. And the design effect is extraordinary. And again, we had to assemble these in pieces, not get the lacquer on the polymer, but it's glued down to wood in a veneer press. I started to play with sculptural things. I made lamps, and that fish has a wire armature, has foil, as a body, sort of armature type body, and then the polymer clay is put over that. So we just really played with all kinds of ideas. I made a really tall floor lamp for a while, which was crazy, used a ton of clay, but there are stacking pieces, and that's about 5 foot tall. And that looks very much like glass. And you can see that millefiori technique kind of happening in there. We made torchère lamps, pre-LED, so it was very interesting to try to do lighting that didn't get too hot for the polymer clay. I made molds that we built forms over, and I started using molds to make forms, sculptural forms, and that was really different. And we're still working on ways to combine. Here's my carving, the polymer clay vessel, and then a wooden top on it. So we're always thinking about two mediums working together. And same with this is a veneered surface. And here's a little carving and sculptural. These are full-sized fish. This is a huge mirror. It's really outrageously fun. But we just really kept playing with the furniture, all the possibilities with pattern and texture. And this chair is veneered inside and out with tiles of polymer clay, but they're quite thin. And this was really complicated to do because it has curves going two different directions. So we built a shell and glued the polymer clay down to that. And the seat is an upholstered seat that's dropped in. But I think this was one of our really wonderful accomplishments, and chairs are very challenging. And it reads like fabric, actually. The top appears to be solid polymer, but it is actually glued down over a substrate that's fiberboard. So it gives the illusion of this thick polymer top. And it's a very, very simple cane. Some of these are from slides. That's why they're really crusty pictures. Yes, slides. We remember those, right? And we did some seating just with little windows of polymer clay and made the fabric, the wood, the carving, and the polymer all work together. So we really explored quite a bit. This is veneered down to this arcing surface, and it's actually glued down with contact, heavy duty contact cement. And yes, we did this together, and we're still married, trying to lay a large rectangular piece in this framework and with contact cement, because sometimes we could put things in the veneer press, and sometimes we use contact cement to hold the polymer down because it wasn't something we could readily clamp to glue it. We started getting into doing these really big pieces, multiple panels. We kind of figured out how to make doors. This piece is actually in the permanent collection of the Racine Art Museum. And we're really honored for that to be there. And it was part of the Terra Nova show, which was, they had a show that was all about the history of polymer clay. And they have an extensive collection of polymer clay at the Racine Art Museum. And it's really, really wonderful that they embraced it. And they've really sort of lifted the medium up by bringing it into focus in that. And that top is wood, not polymer, by the way. It's very highly figured wood. And there's a close-up. It's kind of almost like terrazzo. You look at that, if you're familiar with making polymer designs, you'll know that that is not a very complicated design, but it's really about what you do with it. And the larger the surface, the more real estate you have to play with design. Here's a very simple design, but repeated over a large surface, it's almost fractally. You can see the round slices in the details of that, of this credenza. But it's really cool because we could veneer the polymer clay down to these curved surfaces in a veneer press. And the use of thin wood veneers being glued down, very similar kind of technique, the actual gluing, but we're using a sheet of plastic that's 1/8 of an inch thin and will bend over that surface when we glue it down in a vacuum press is what we actually were using. And then there's all this figure in wood that is sort of fractally. So it was really fun to find this medium that could kind of have this natural effect, go back and forth with the wood and the polymer. And I started to get into these doing more botanical designs, and I could pretty much spend any day making leaves all day long. I love making leaves. But one of the things I started to learn with this was how to sort of fit pieces together and really control the design. And I'm going to show you just a little bit of how that was done. And this piece is really cool. It's called an altar coffer. It's based on Chinese design. It was shown at the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts, which has a huge collection of furniture and things from the trade in China and beyond. And they asked 15 furniture makers to come sort of swim in their collection of Chinese furniture, which is remarkable Chinese furniture. It's so sophisticated. And we, from so long ago, really. And we made this piece inspired by some of the pieces we saw, as did the other furniture makers. Actually, Ai Weiwei was part of this group, which we barely knew who he was at that time. And it was really incredible. And so they had a cloisonne table there, and they're like, you guys make pattern furniture, pattern and color on furniture. What could you do? So actually what appears to be this sort of lattice over top is actually just polymer clay veneer. So this is the first time I made such a complex pattern and then cut into it and laid this lattice work over top. It's totally flat. You can kind of see that when you look on the side. And then when you open it up, it's veneered inside as well. And this piece became part of an individual's collection, which is absolutely wonderful. And it was just an amazing experience to really enjoy a museum that way and to look at their collection and learn from it. And this exhibit traveled all around the United States, which was really fun. And it traveled with the pieces that were inspired, the Chinese furniture that inspired the artists. So it's really, really exciting. And then we sort of went off and built some other pieces that were inspired by that piece. This is a huge piece. It's kind of a watercolor effect. It's a real translucent layer over a super colorful sky layer underneath. And I just kind of kept going with all these botanicals, and people say, well, can you do this? I'm like, I don't know, let me see. And of course, I found that I could, because polymer clay really replicates a lot of patterns you find in nature, basically. And this effect with the pearlescent is really astounding. It looks almost enameled, that swirling behind it. It reads very reflective on the surface when you see it as gold and pearl background on the flowers. Oh, that's a fuzzy picture. But some of these started to really feel more like paintings, which kind of is leading into what we were doing next. And I love plant forms. I am a science art person. So every possibility I just love playing with for some custom pieces. And JM said, well, can we do something with yellow? I'm like, oh my God, yellow in furniture. I will tell you that furniture tends to limit your palette. And that was really fun to do these canna lilies because of their wild sort of fluttery shapes, and also the kinds of colors I could include. And this is actually real birch logs on either side. We had this at SOFA Chicago, which is Sculptural Objects and Functional Art, huge show. It was with Gallery Function Art. It was an amazing experience to go there and show our work, in the same show where Chihuli's showing things, and just amazing work there. And we're really honored to be able to do that. And we also incorporated some of the carving back in there. I really had fun making fish. So some of this stuff is really playful and fun, and sort of a mixing of all kinds of things. There's metal armature inside those leaves, it's carved branches and carved poles. So we really have this whole vocabulary we started building between the surface design and all the different mediums. Very sky pictorial type things. This has some carving in it too. So what I want to show you a little bit about how we do what we do in relation to the furniture, but then it's going to help you understand the jewelry, and we're going to move on to jewelry. There's the clay. Do I have? Yeah, got a little movie here. This is my architectural flat files full of clay. That is the packs of polymer clay. Sometimes I have 1 pound blocks. Sometimes I have the little 2 ounce blocks, but that's my palette. And very poor picture of me slicing through a big old block of clay. But what we do is if you're not familiar with polymer clay, it is a plastic powder in an oily plasticizer that makes this block of sort of malleable colored clay, and it can be mixed to create any colors. This is a very sped up video that shows you, I have these 2 color sheets, but it's showing you how I make this really cool effect, which is a blended color sheet. And you will see a lot of that color blending and a lot of the work that I do. It's really one of the backbones of design for me, because it creates a really fluid flow of color. And this is just showing how I pass it through a pasta machine, and you can see I'm always putting it in the same way. And eventually these colors will mix from light to dark. And you can just see, I don't work this fast usually though. You just get an idea of, you can see sort of how flexible it is, and how in a certain way that you control it, you can create this really cool color blend. And it actually, I joke because this is sped up, but it does actually is a fairly fast process, and it's very cool. And it is absolutely mesmerizing if you like color. So here is a big strip of that color blend going from one color to another. And then on my big glass top table. And then here, you're going to see me take that strip, and I'm going to cut it up. And I'm going to stack it chromatically, with the colors. You can see those little stacks. I'm going to make a big sort of rainbow stack there. And then cut it up, and I'm putting little slices of that sort of white color in between. So what I'm making is a big black-eyed Susan petal. And this is for a wall piece. So here you see the color. You can see the little inserted strips, and here's the color blend. And now you can see I'm going to reduce this, and this is Millefiori work basically that would be done in glass. That is the technique. I'm going to just do that one more time. I'm squeezing and forming it. And so I've made this shape, but in the next video, you're going to see, I'm actually going to, well, there you go. I recombined it and squeezed it together. And then what I do is I take the slices and I flatten them out. And these are going to be huge black-eyed Susan petals. So that's, you can see those are, the dark line is a 1-inch block. So here it is with my pasta machine. I'm going to take those, pass it through 3 times, and I end up with this giant, I'm going to do it one more time. I come up with this giant petal, and that is basically like, I could use that by itself, but I also could cut sections out of that like a brush stroke of color. So that technique of stacking layers is borrowed from glass, but obviously, you know, like if you've seen flowered beads, Millefiori type beads, that there's a way of layering glass and heating it and stretching it, and you can keep that design, a slice of that design integral. It's much, much easier with polymer clay, but that polymer clay has borrowed techniques from so many different mediums because the physical manipulation of it can mimic some other techniques. Then here you can see this was getting ready for another piece. I will have just tons and tons of slices. Some of them, you can see the cane up here. You can see the cane. I lost my cursor. All right. You can see the cane, you can see slices of it, and you can see stretched out slices. What I had been doing with the vessels and the furniture is having an underlayer of scrap and then laying these slices out in pieces and fitting them together. And I always work on wax paper, and then I put wax paper over top after I've pieced these together, and I burnish it and roll it with a roller, and I will end up with a big sheet of design. So it's sort of like puzzle piecing things together. After that was fired, now this was for a piece of furniture, I take it to the joiner and cut the edges perfectly straight. Even if I cut them straight before it's fired, I fire in a full-sized oven on sheets of glass. But in order to use it in the furniture, we would actually use the woodworking machines to cut the plastic, and it cuts like butter. I mean, it's very, very soft. It's soft like, I would say, pine, but you can see the way I'm pushing against the fence there, it also flexes. So, you know, it has some similarity to wood in some of the ways you handle it in a machine. We would cut it on the table saw. You can cut it with a knife, you can file it, you can use all your woodworking tools. And here, JM is taking pieces that have contact cement on them. Oh, you can see the cabinet behind that has those peaches on it. But these are vessels, and they have the form is a bent lamination form in wood, and then the polymer sheets, which you can see the backside of them right there. He's rolling them onto that and gluing them down in our finishing room. Now, we don't work at this scale anymore, but we still do have our veneer press. And you can see I could make things incredibly complicated. I started to learn that I could kind of make wavy things. I could overlap them. And trim away what was underneath in order to get some really complex designs. And this was one of the first big wall pieces we did. And this is when the design started to lift off of the furniture. And I just wanted more freedom to do things. And this feels like a painting. This is about 40 inches long. It's like a triptych. And just having that freedom of not saying, oh, what kind of furniture does this work with? I didn't want the restriction of furniture anymore. So we started doing some wall pieces, and I'm really having fun with abstract and realistic design, because the fractally nature of the polymer clay design makes for such a pattern dense surface that can be viewed close up and far away. There's translucency, there's pearlescence, and it's an incredibly rich surface. It's very reminiscent of wood grain. This is a really big piece. This is about 30 inches square. And And you can see I can only fire about an 18 by 21 piece in my oven, but when it's put together, you can use the seams or you can hide the seams, but you can see clearly the 4 quadrants of the pieces that went together to make this. But the pearlescence and the translucency, it reminds you of wood grain when you see it, because it has a chatoyance. It has the pearlescent is a flake pearlescent, so it actually sort of shimmers in the light in a directional way, and it's very cool. There's so much light that comes into the surface with polymer clay. And I also started doing things. This actually has 2 layers of texture, and the slices are sitting fired down to another surface, but there's texture to them. They're actually just, you can feel the slices. So I didn't do that on the furniture because I always wanted it to feel smooth, and we wet sand it so it was smooth. So it's really fun to start to be able to play with texture to help the design really read well. So I think ultimately color and pattern are my greatest passion, and they're just limitless possibility, because you can also mix polymer clay sort of infinitely like paints. The pigments are pretty true to paint colors, and so you really, and plus you have pearlescence and translucence, so it really is just an incredible palette to work with. Here's a little view of my studio now, and here's the shift. We really started doing these wall pieces. We moved to Maine, and we decided we're going to stop making furniture because it was really, we wanted a change. We wanted more freedom. And so I'm working in a pretty small space. There's my flat files again. So this is how I'm storing. I'll have pieces of veneer, and this is like having fabric samples or, paintbrush strokes. And that's really the way I think about that. And I store them in wax paper in my big flat files. And this is our small metals area. We still have a small woodworking area. We reduced our shop size a great deal. And there's my granddad's machinist chest, and it's in a roomy garage. But it's been wonderful to add metals to I was asked by my mother-in-law to make her some stick pins, and I was like, oh, maybe I should use precious metal clay. And then I was like, no, I need to put on my big girl pants and learn how to solder. So I did. And then it was just like, oh my God, there's a whole other medium. It has tensile strength. I can fire it inside the polymer clay, which I would not do with wood. And so one of the first things I started doing was making pins. So these are brooches with a metal frame using prongs. But I was able to play, and they're dome shaped actually in profile. And so it was like taking the paintings and making them very small. And it was just wonderful being able to, now when you see this slide, you can really see the detail on that. One of the things we always struggled with the pictures of our furniture, people look at that and just say, oh, well, it must be painted, but you're not really looking at the surface very closely. So the intimacy of jewelry is, and the lightness of polymer clay makes a wonderful combination for jewelry. These are all sort of dome shapes. They can be pendants or pins, but they were really, you can see the transition between the wall pieces of those. And then I started making linked components and adding metal parts to it too. And just trying to keep learning some metal skills and covering up a fair amount of my metal work with polymer, and then trying, I've just slowly been adding metal in. And actually, JM and I both do metalworking, and right now he does a lot of it, but this was all my work to start. This is actually, that's mahogany, or excuse me, walnut at the bottom. And so I initially was playing with some wooden parts and wood, metal, and polymer. And I found that really interesting. I do love carving and sculpting. So, and then once I had my flex shaft tool, I was like, wow, this is fun. I can get really detailed with this. Of course, I went with my love of landscapes, made these are tiny little pins. So, I started with what I was familiar with. Always having a little fun along the way, and just kept expanding. And we started making some more sculptural necklaces. These have a lightweight clay as a body in between, and seeing, playing with volume, playing with shape, and trying to understand, making furniture to fit people's bodies is one thing. Making jewelry to fit people's bodies is a very different thing. And, we always used to joke our furniture made everybody look sexy, but I found out that, yeah, people have a lot of body issues when you make jewelry about their necks and, their ears. And it's like, wow, this is a whole new thing. But also one of the really fun things about jewelry is the range of color that we could use. So I started out with sort of flat wire and then started building these sculptural shapes and kind of draping it or, upholstering it with design and saying, oh, one of the really cool things about polymer and jewelry is you can essentially, I'm going to say almost like upholster inside surfaces with pattern, which I think is quite hard to do with just other mediums. So one of the things I'm always asking myself is, okay, I can make beads, but what can I do with polymer that you can't do with other mediums? And that's the part which I find is very interesting. What does polymer do well? And one of the things I started really doing more of with the jewelry is taking things in and out of the oven and, firing one part of it and then firing another part of it. And working progressively like this, I could get really complex shapes. I could not cover these pieces all one at a time. So sandwiching different layers around the wire armatures, putting in the oven, firing it, pulling it back out, doing another section. That was not something I did with our big panels and veneers, but I'm still thinking about polymer as a veneer. I've figured out how to sort of make these marquetry like designs where I'm cutting pattern in, and now I can work in multiple stages. And it's like every time I turn with polymer and try something different, I learn that, oh wait, there's more. Oh wait, nope, sorry, there aren't restrictions. No, in fact, you could do that too. And it's like, just, how creative can you be? What can you imagine? Because it's probably going to be possible. So we both were working on building wire structures and covering them. And just, I figured out how to cover wire a little bit at a like flattened wire, one strip at a time. And so it was really fun to play with this feeling of dimension. Some of these are sort of pod shaped jewelry. So of course, we're still making big things. We hadn't at this point, we were still making a little bit of furniture. I had these, when we made lampshades for our lamps, I had these steel round wires. And we said, what if we could do a big sculptural piece? So what we actually did with this is probably about, it's about 20 inches across, but it's 3 sections that we actually held together. We didn't even solder them. We actually held them together with epoxy sculpt, which is a 2-part clay that is amazing in terms of joining metal. And we made these, there's a black and white section, a blue section, and a red section. And this piece can be hung on the wall or it can sit on a table. And I covered this steel wire and fired each section, and then we joined the 3 of them together. So now it was like moving from furniture to the jewelry with wire, and then we pushed it out bigger. And then this piece is also this is probably about 18 inches round, and it stands off the wall. It's all made with lampshade rings that were joined in these funny ways, and it's all about inside and outside space. It's a crazy piece. But it was just really fun. Some of these things I just had to do to figure out what I could do. And I'm using the marquetry. This was fired in many stages, and the background, the red and yellow background, was actually a board that was veneered, and then the wire structure, it's kind of it's really like the pins basically on a very large scale, but I had to support it with cardboard and like acrylic stuffing as I fired each layer so it didn't slump. But interesting, when it gets on this scale, all those black and white surfaces look like woodblock prints to me, and it made me think a lot about grayscale made me think, I mean, it's just really interesting, the directional quality of the lines leads your eye to do so many things. And then it's actually moving in space and has a sculptural quality. I mean, there is just so much you could do with this. And as you might guess, I have a really nice set of cutters that I use, kind of like cookie cutters. Some of them are culinary cutters. Some we've had made for us in machine shop. I've made some in metal. And so all these designs are cut and moved around in this sort of, it's almost like marquetry or quilting way that I'm creating pattern. So back to the jewelry, we're playing with, I thought, well, those are nice necklaces, single pieces, but what if, I have a dress form here in the studio. What if I just put a bunch of them together and made this sort of sculptural framework? And these pieces stand up, they're about an inch high. Most of them are a sculptural shape. And then I made the pieces, then figured out how they fit together in wire. And then I soldered the loops on them and figured out how to join them. So I was really just playing with this, like, how much could I pile up here and create volume and have it work on a neck form? So I use this dress form quite a bit to brainstorm and to really think about the use of the human body and how it goes around a neck and down a sternum. It's been a really key part of me imagining new work. These are all metal chains that are metal links that are covered by polymer. And we kind of figured out when I learned how to make a chain in wire, I thought, well, why can't I do that in polymer? So I would make half of the links, fired each one side at a time, covered it with polymer. Then the second set of links that were going to join it, I didn't solder them shut, but they had a little seam in them. And then we glued them back together after they joined with the solid link. So this does have a wire armature in it. And it's kind of cuckoo crazy, but you can cover flattened wire. And it's so light, and it's sort of crazy that you can basically, upholster wire with pattern and color. Yep, so I started looking at a lot of jewelry forms. These pieces are, if you would look them in cross section, they're actually sort of V-shaped. So there's a silver flattened wire that sort of runs like a backbone through all of these pieces. And then they're linked in a really traditional way, but of course this is sort of adjustable. You can put the hook into any one of these pieces, but I love making these little components that each one of them is like a little funny story to me about pattern and form and color. And this became a really fun thing for me to do, is making these little sort of, I call them biobop forms. They're like biologically, they kind of remind me of plant forms, but maybe they remind me of something else. And I really have fun creating each little element and putting it together in a larger necklace. And I have done a lot of this, and it's so pleasing to me because they're very much one of a kind, and they are just me playing with pattern and shape. But the wire is sandwiched like an armature in between two layers of polymer clay. And it's just enough structure for the polymer. And it's a very sturdy necklace, but it's very light too. So I got into using beading wire, and I'm still using it quite a bit too. This is multi-strand stainless steel beading wire. It's nylon coated. This is like a 7-strand 0.024 beading wire that is wound, crimped, and then I am sandwiching the polymer clay over it. And oh boy, have I had fun with it. It's so light and springy. I can fire the clay in the oven with it. I can make half the pieces. This is like the chain making idea. I made half the pieces and fired them, and then put the joining pieces on and fired it again. And I usually work in sections. And the cool thing about jewelry, which is a little different than furniture and even the wall pieces, is that you can work in components. And so that is a huge idea that I came back to with the wall pieces after I was working in the jewelry. And it's all about how you can handle the polymer clay. You can never handle a complex piece that's completely on fired clay, but if you can work it in sections and then join those sections, it's amazing what you can do. This is super organic, super light. It's all beading wire, and those petals are really thin little pieces of polymer sandwiched around the crimps. And I love doing this. This is so different than the veneer work, but it reminds me of watercolor painting. It's very gestural, and it's kind of like when you're done, you don't keep messing with it. And it's a really fun sort of dimensional, springy, kinetic piece to wear. And I started to realize I could sort of put this together like chainmail. So I was like getting into this idea of volume and sort of springy, because the polymer clay is so light. It's kind of interesting. The springiness of the wire and the lightness of the polymer work really well together. If you use really rigid wires with polymer clay and they're under a lot of tension, it's possible rigid wire can actually tear the polymer clay if it's under stress. But what happens with these little springy loops is they will flex if they are stressed. And so it really, the whole thing has kind of a flex to it, and it's easier on the polymer clay. So this is an interesting thing you learn when you mix mediums. These are really thin chips of polymer clay that are joined almost like balled wire. Those are little pieces of, the dots you see are like a little piece of wire, beading wire with a crimp on either side. And this necklace is insanely light and sort of fluffy. And because these pieces are curled and the beading wire is flexible, the whole thing kind of flexes a little bit. And even though they're thin, if you had a regular metal, balled wire metal in there, and you had like a little metal ball joint where each piece was joined, if they were stressed, they would probably tear through that thin polymer clay. But because there's actually a little polymer clay piece there, and the wire flexes, the whole thing has this springiness to it. So it's about understanding how the mediums all interact. And of course with jewelry, like how is it going to be stressed? And these are so thin. I was playing with these techniques where I keep just folding 2 sheets of design together and making it really thin. And so one design actually starts to show through the other. So you get these almost watercolor effects with the polymer clay. And yes, this is our lovely friend Nicole, who was modeling these pieces, which I lovingly call, well, they are called auras, like an aura of, a light. But they actually, we jokingly call them drecklaces, because it's a necklace that got so big it became a dress. And it really drops down like a halter or a vest over top of something else. And here's another piece, but it's basically like chainmail. This one's a little bit more like macrame, where the wire is just joined by the crimps, kind of arranged. And I built these over a dress form. These are so much fun. These are crazy. I have worn these more than once. Here's some close-up earrings using some of that sort of flowery technique. And I really have had fun creating like these big honking earrings that like weigh next to nothing. So the wire has been a really fun, it's almost like creating a fabric. And it's just a really loose form for me to play with. And this is a tie that is made, when I made this, the way I joined the polymer, the wire, I basically was working on a pin board and treating it almost like macrame. I had a drawing underneath it, and I could use pins to hold it down and crimp it. And I built all the crimps, and then I added the polymer clay in a few stages. And there it is on a dress form. But it's also, I love things where you see through different layers. So that's really the fun part about all these wire structures. Okay, bracelets. Yep, they're the really hard thing to do. People really are pretty tough on bracelets. And so, it's an interesting question. If you're not going to string beads, how are you going to create structure? We made some bracelets that have like a flexible form. They have wire inside. They have 2-part epoxy clay that creates the body, and then the veneers are fired over the epoxy. It's called epoxy sculpt, and it's phenolic. You can put it in the oven. It doesn't change. It doesn't expand or contract in any way that's appreciable. And it's a lovely friend to polymer clay. So it's kind of, this is encased in veneers, and it has these seams in it. So it has some flex to it. But we have been on the exploration of bracelets. I love bracelets, and boy, is it a challenge. We started doing more visible metal work and sandwiching veneers around wire armatures, and these are pins with pin backs. And start to oxidize the metal and play with that. So there's just a few different things going on here. I started to add more volume and mix the beading wire in with the metal and the polymer. I started to add a little bit of paint and texture to the metal, because the question is like, you have this metal, you have this polymer, how do these things talk to each other? Why are these two things together? Do they have any relationship? So adding texture and color in the metal, and then adding some texture to the polymer clay, and then also making the forms move out into space, which is what the wire kind of opens up the form. So this has been really interesting, just vocabulary to try to build. This is a piece I did for a polymer clay. This was, I forget which this was a retreat actually, or it was no, it was a polymer clay gathering of the National Polymer Clay Guild, and this is talking about the shoreline around us and where I live, and tide charts and fractal edges of the leaves. So it's got stamping in the metal, it's oxidized, it's got acrylic paint in it, it's got patterning in the polymer, and it's got, if the polymer is carved with acrylic paint worked into it. And I feel like, you know, I'm just like learning how to make everything flow back and forth, and have a language that makes sense between all the different mediums. So just not a very good photo. We had a fabulous photographer, and this is about when he retired. So my photographs slowly get better after this point, but these were some pieces that we did thinking about like these abstracted flower arrangements. This is a technique I don't use that much. The pattern on there is a mokomagane, which is a Japanese word that means wood grain. It's like Damascus steel, but we use this in polymer. We build up lots of really thin layers and press and manipulate it, and then slice very low angle slices and get these really interesting patterns. So this felt like the kind of thing I wanted to use for these butterfly forms. But I was getting a little more adventuresome about the metalworking of this. And having more exposed metal be part of the language. And playing with graphic patterns and all these little individual elements. Then I started thinking, like, why can't I layer these pieces? So these are all joined by hooks and loops on the back of this. And this really showed me that, you know, ultimately the sky's the limit for how I could put pieces together. So I made all the pieces, the front veneer of all the pieces, and then fired a wire armature inside it with little hook and loop attachments to be arranged and overlapped in the way that I wanted it to. So I could work incrementally, I could build the elements, compose them on the dress form, and then start to back them and put the wire armature in, and then join it as the very last thing that I did. So building in components really allowed me to make these really fun things, to compose it as I go, which is the way I think about composition. I create a palette, work on the patterns, create the components, and then put them together. And there were pieces I didn't include, and pieces I made after I got started because I needed more or wanted a different effect. And this is just so fun for me. After I did that one, I was looking at all these wood etchings, and I had been thinking back to that big wall piece where it almost looked like a woodblock print to me. And I thought, well, why can't I try to show? I was looking at they're wood etchings of all these geometric forms, and so I just started playing with it. It was like you know, it's like when you first start drawing and you have to just draw in black and white, and just really interesting study of using that sort of grayscale and also directional quality of the polymer clay pattern to create this feeling of wood grain and direction and shadow and light. And then I tried to do it in color, which ended up being really, really, really hard, but it was really interesting. And I'm always learning something. One of the things I learned with this was that I was using a lot of stripes, but where I wanted the brightest surfaces to be, I used these color blends to kind of look like a reflected surface. And it's, some pieces look more dimensional than the others, but it's just like every time you turn the corner and try something new, at first, like, I'm a mental midget. I cannot figure this out, and then you're like, oh, okay, but you know what? The only way out is through. If you want to try something, you can think about it, but you have to do it. It's all practice. It's over and over and over is exploration, and that's how you grow. And I just have learned so much from doing some of these processes about color and shape and form. This is a jointed piece. We use little micro fasteners that these pivot on. They're not really my favorite thing to do, but it was interesting to see we could in fact do that. This piece is jointed as well and does actually sit over a neck form quite nicely, but they were really odd shapes. So just playing with untraditional shapes and seeing how they nest has been very interesting to do. Back to the bracelets. We tried making them with these flex points, and not with the flex points, but a lot of times what I'm looking for is a really great canvas for design. So I love these big cuffs, playing with my marquetry, and I'm basically, JM is building a whole understructure, and then I'm coming along and veneering it in polymer. And that's great teamwork. And I can't say enough about the two of us collaborating, combining our skills, passing things back and forth. There's always so much room for ideas, and each of us can focus on another aspect of it. And it's been really interesting to transition to the jewelry and the wall pieces and not the furniture, because it was a pretty smooth transition. Both of us really, we have a whole habit of mind about thinking about things together and structure. So these have been a really interesting thing to continue to explore. These bracelets are built around a single wire sort of hook and springy hook and loop structure. It just has a closure just where you can see where the little overlap is, and they're springy. And what's interesting is we fired the front and then encased the wire, but the polymer holds the wire and the wire holds the polymer. So it's like the wire is that backbone shape, but it has a springiness to it, and the polymer is willing to bend and spring. So you can hook and unhook these. They're held by spring tension and in the hammered bronze wire. And what a fun palette just to build these strips of design with, these sort of funky edges, and then veneer them over this wire hook and loop structure. And there you could kind of see it a little bit better in this, the way it overlaps. And again, it's here, I'm still upholstering the inside with design. So just a really fun thing. Yep, so I do like to draw. So, about when COVID hit, I kind of hunkered down and came back to, I wanted to do some real pictorial things. So I started drawing animals, which is one of the first things I did when I was a kid. I loved to draw from national wildlife. And I just found it really centering. Makes me really happy to draw. And it's still kind of the way I think and imagine things. So I started doing these animal drawings because I realized that I can kind of create most imagery I can imagine. And really, it's really fun. What I do is I take this drawing and I layer it, I tape it down to my glass surface and put wax paper over it. So what looks like the drawing is actually has a layer of wax paper over it. And you can just see all these little textures with the polymer clay that I can, like the eyes, I used my cutters to get them really round, but everything else is kind of free form. It feels like painting to me. Honestly, I tried to paint something to help my son with an illustration project that he's a graphic designer, and by the time I was done, I was like, oh my God, I just wish I could do this in polymer. I think in polymer now. I think about pattern in polymer. So here's some, you can sort of see the way these pieces are coming together. And it's sort of like putting a puzzle together. It's sort of like, in my mind, almost feels like a coloring book. After I've done the drawing, it's the map for the texture. And I'm still looking at the photo to really understand what's happening with dark and light. But those textures are so perfect to show the directional quality of feathers and that sort of micro level of pattern. And, you know, here I'm making lichen and the branches, and all this is this kind of fractally, very textured polymer that I know so well now, that the effect it has close up and far away. This owl is probably about 18 inches tall. Here he is, all done. And they're held on the wall. We figured out we can use rare earth magnets to hold these up on the wall. This guy actually has a little wooden cleat to hold him on the wall, but we started using magnets, and it's just really fun. And here I'll show you with this little goldfinch, who is the birds are all life-size basically, but here you can see how he's how all these little bits are put together. And he's a little guy. And here, this little movie, you can just see I've been firing them just that first layer on glass. It literally has holes in it. And then I take that and I adhere it down to another layer of polymer. And that just allows me to work all these little bits in. If there's gaps, I can fill them in the second firing. And this is the branch that the goldfinch is sitting on. So I actually finished the bird, fired it, and then built the branch afterwards. So I'm also working in components with this, one bit at a time. And there's the finished bird. And that branch actually has a wire armature in it. It does not have a wooden armature. The bird is wood, and then we extended wire on the back of it on either side and fired the wire, the polymer clay around the wire. So we're still using our bag of tricks from jewelry and from furniture for these. And this is, oh yeah, here's this little speed up one, just shows me building some of this. I do love time lapse. And you just kind of see how I'm cutting out little bits of pattern and just finding the perfect little highlight and shadow. And I can see it in the just those scraps of clay, and it's so fun for me, so fun for me. It's like painting. This nuthatch has wire armature in the branches, and they're drilled and put into the tree, and the bird all have a wooden backing. And we actually paint the edges in acrylic paint, and it's only about 1/4 of an inch thick. And that's held on the wall with the magnets. These are huge. This whole thing is about 7 foot tall, the Queen Anne's lace. So here's when I started thinking in components. So the flower tops are one piece, the stems are a second piece. And those stems, because they're 4 feet maybe long, I'm going back to thinking about furniture and like how that is all put together. So there's seams that are glued together, and then it's glued down to the wood, and then we hang it we actually have like a map, a pattern piece that goes up on the wall. It shows us where to screw the fasteners, and then we put it on one piece at a time. And it's really fun to do these big pieces. I'm using texture, and the texture, you can see the thickness of them now. And by the way, yes, we did get a professional photographer, thank God, because I could never take these photos. You really start to see more about how these pieces come together in the detail. So there's translucency, there's layering, it's in components, and like that, you can see Skinner blends in the little green pieces. I mean, there's just so much vocabulary that's built over time. So I did this whole series of flowers, and just really took something, is like, wow, there's a lot of complication to this. I do small drawings. I scan them in Adobe Illustrator. I scan them in to my computer. I blow them up on Adobe Illustrator, tape them back together, do another drawing, tape it down to my surface, and go from there. So lots of just, is this, oh no, that's not. So you can see how thin I'm working on these, but I am working in layers of texture. I think this is my little movie. It's my little drone footage of my table, right? And you can see the texture on these. absolutely a study in color and shadow, how to make things dimensional. And honestly, it's pretty sloppy when you get up close. It is not super precise. But there's a lot of detail, and I absolutely love playing with this detail. And that's the finished piece. So that's about maybe 22 inches, 24 inches wide. So the flowers are really big. And so JM set up this board for me to work, because sometimes I was doing these last year. It was pretty hard sometimes to really get a good perspective on things when the bigger they get. And this trillium, like I made petal canes that were pretty big, but to get these shadows, I really had to go back and cut in lots of little pieces to get that effect. And I still use some texturing on these too. So anyway, this is not jewelry, but this is the way my brain works. Big black-eyed Susan, these are all really big. That one's probably more like 32 inches, 36 inches across, and lots of texture. This is kind of showing how when I have canes, then I slice them up in all these little bits, and then I'm still going to have to take all those bits and run them through my pasta machine so that they're all the same thickness, and then that's how I build my veneers. And then you can kind of see how this is in process. These are lupins that I did. And when I'm working, it's weird to yo-yo back and forth between small and large, but that's what the studio looks like when I'm working on something really big. I got photos, I got drawings, I got layers and layers of pre-rolled pieces that I'm going to piece together. And there's, you can see the dimensional quality of it from the side. It's about, a quarter inch thick. And we just had the pleasure of making this again this was sold to an individual client here in Maine, but we just made a commission piece like this for Beth Israel Hospital that will be going up there in, I'm not sure, sometime this year, thanks to Boston Art Inc., who is showing our work in places. They've placed over 150 pieces of artwork, I think, in Beth Israel Hospital. It is in Boston. So what a thrill to do some public art. That's just something we really wanted to do. Whoops.
Bonnie, are you almost done, or should we stop for a few minutes? Or
oh yeah, we could stop. Let me just,
if you're almost done, then we can wait a few more minutes and then do all the questions.
yeah, let's do that because I'm almost done with these, and then I have just a little more jewelry. And
Okay.
yeah, all right, cool. So this was just another owl. This is a little showing you, I have these little tube cutters that I use these on the flat and the dimensional work. And they're just brass tubes of differing sizes, and I can use those for really fine detail. In this case, it was making the texture on the owl, and I decided to sort of stylize the texture. So I'm sort of working between graphic and representational when things have a lot of pattern to them. It's definitely the rabbit hole I love to live in. The owl was really interesting study of texture, and we had one of these showed up in a field near us a few years ago that became a real point of fascination. And there he is, and that's life size, so it's pretty big. And just so fun to play with pattern on that scale and the color shift of all of that. But there's a few more wall pieces, and oh, yep, we're back to the jewelry. So, so there's a lot of back and forth. I started using silver components in the earrings, and you can see there's a little acrylic paint in there, and these little balled wire pivot joints, which I absolutely love using as a detail. And I'm firing polymer around that little wire at the base. So it's very fun, marquetry and using wire armatures. We have more pieces that use silver as a full component and is sort of interacting pattern wise with the polymer patterns. This is a body length necklace, and it is literally, if you put it on, it would touch the floor, but if you wrap it, it makes these really interesting shapes. And we built it around the beading wire which was interesting. I found out that if you stress that beading wire too much, it snaps. So we started building a similar style necklace that has this sort of funky chiseled way of wrapping because of the length of the beads. They're very thin, so you couldn't really string a bead like that. It has to be built around something. So we started building around stainless steel wire, going back to a really simple way of joining things. Here's more multi-piece pivoting jewelry, more pivots, and texturing and oxidizing, stacking up forms, components, order of operations, so many different ways of approaching it. Now back to the beading wire, building up a flat volume with two very thin pieces of veneer sandwiched around them. Those are a 1/16 of an inch thick, all told. And just seeing what I can do with the combination of the beading wire and the polymer and this floaty. This is a body length necklace, actually. There's little there's little jump rings joining the sections of wire, so this thing can kind of pivot and twist. So this wire won't break if I twist and untwist this necklace, but it can be one very long necklace or wrapped into smaller pieces. But I figured out the mechanics of that. Big fluffy wire necklace, which I think I showed you some of that one before. And this is a series I'm just getting started on. It's really, really fun. This is a pin. It has a domed metal shape that is drilled out like a half dome. And then the beading wire is coming through perforations in the metal. And they're just like all these springy little stamens. And the polymer is fired on those, and then it's put into this form. And you can kind of see how it's coming out of those holes. So I'm having crazy fun with this. You can't really, you can play with this. You can kind of pet it, and the things are just springy like little antenna. And it's a fairly heavy beading wire, but a really fun technique. And a lot of times the jewelry, when I'm working on it, the earrings are ways to just keep playing with patterns. I do reverse patterns, two different things, and I keep cutting and switching the colors, so there'll be opposites, two different colorways. Really have fun figuring things out on a small scale. And I've been enjoying doing these butterflies. It's kind of the last body of work I've been doing. I took that butterfly necklace and started turning them into pins and playing with butterfly forms. Of course, I want to do these big for the wall too. But it's just moths and butterflies are so crazy in all that they have. And so fun to play with the polymer patterns. And this is, you can just see how I can piece these things together. It's still that same idea of cutting and fitting over my drawing. And I can build something really complex with this marquetry kind of technique. And we're soldering the body to a plate of silver or copper that's been oxidized, and then sandwiching the clay around it. So there's so much possibility with these in terms of form. The wings are well supported by sheet silver or bronze or copper. So there's just so much that can be done between the metal and the polymer clay. It's been really amazing. And there's some mocha magane and some marquetry in this. And then I started making antenna with the wire. And, the vocabulary just keeps crossing back and forth between all these pieces. And then I just get inspired by what is actually out there in the world. And then it bubbles back in my brain with the polymer. And flower forms, these are all flowers. Basically, I have echinacea and black-eyed Susan in my garden. And, I look at these things. The trillium flowers. This one has this is more dimensional. It has wire armatures going out in the petals. And we've been playing with linked bracelets lately now too, with covering sections in polymer clay and having the wire. So we're sort of sandwiching the two and linking the forms, which of course makes a much easier to wear bracelet. So it's been fun to do that. All kinds of things. And these have sculpted areas, and I'm just wrapping up here. Big colorful necklaces, veneered front and back. And there's the little stamen guys as earrings. Very fun. You can see the wires going on the back of there. And last but not least, this is just the latest round of bracelets we did, they're linked, they're veneer, it's oxidized sterling silver. And yeah, interesting forms. We're really enjoying this. And those feel like the best cuffs we build out yet. But I am going to stop sharing and go back to my face and answer questions. So that's probably about all you want to look at right now.
Wow. Bonnie, that was amazing. So
Thank you.
inspiring. You're so amazingly talented and it was just fabulous. I'm going to go through some questions and we'll see.
Okay.
So this is from the beginning when you were talking about showing your furniture, and someone asked, how does the polymer tile hold up as a tabletop? Does it scratch or gouge easily?
It's soft. It's soft like pine is soft. You can scratch it. We recommended treating it like fine furniture. Nice thing is you can put a glass on there, but if you scratch it, you can polish a certain amount scratching off. But it's, you got to treat it like furniture, fine furniture. So yeah, it's not good for a high use thing like a kitchen table, but for an end table, it's great. For vertical, we did a lot with cabinets. So it's a vertical face, and that doesn't get that same kind of wear, but yeah.
Wonderful.
So.
And then another question, please repeat the medium that you mentioned doesn't stick to plastic. Does a polymer or acrylic clear coat, marine or for outdoors, remain when applied to make the surface wipeable?
Oh, we have never put finishes on the polymer clay.
Okay.
Yeah, because the lacquer we were using would interact with it. We just wet sand the polymer clay.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I do on the jewelry. Sometimes I use Renaissance wax.
Okay.
Yeah, but we don't put finishes on it. Yeah.
Does it have any malleability after heating?
It is plastic. It's like a PVC once it's been cured. If it's really thin, you could wrap it around a piece around a pencil.
Wow.
A big piece is still flexible if it's thin, but the thicker it gets, the less flexible it gets. And you can imagine that with the sheet of plastic, that the thicker it is, the less it'll bend. So we sort of found, like with the bracelets and things, we're still working like 1/16 of an inch a lot of times. So once that's fired, it's still very, very flexible. So we can actually form that around wire and then put another piece of unfired polymer and then form it to the wire shape. So yeah, it definitely has some flex to it.
Fascinating.
And we could put it on the furniture. We could put it in the veneer press and it would form around, a big curve. Like furniture has a really big curve. So to it. Now, the jewelry you were talking about much tighter forms. So there's a point when it's too much tension when it's fired, if it was really thick and you're trying to bend it around something. So sometimes we bake things on a form to get it to hold a curve, and then we sandwich wire around it. So it sort of depends on the application.
When you cover the wire with clay and then fire it in the oven, let's see, doesn't the clay crack when it cools down? That's the question.
No, not really. No. It has memory. So if it's fired on a curve, it wants to stay on a curve. It has a certain amount of flex. And if it's overstressed once it's fired, it might crack, but it doesn't crack. It doesn't crack when it's fired over the wire. No. If that makes sense.
So someone else asked, let's see, was the nylon wire, obviously it doesn't get ruined really when are you baking the?
Yep, goes right in the oven. I put the polymer clay in at around 265, 270, and that just the nylon that is on that beading wire does not seem to be affected by it. I haven't had any problems with it. Some types of plastics some types of, plastic coated things, there's a lot of things you can put in the oven at 265 degrees, but not styrofoam. Many things you can, because it's not really that hot. Yeah, I haven't had any problem with the beading wire. It really doesn't change. Yeah.
Someone asked, how does the magnet attach to the wall?
So those are rare earth magnets. We get them from K&J Magnets, crazy selection of magnets. They are about around an inch big. They're like a donut. There's two of them. They're countersunk. So we can screw one into the wall through the hole of the donut. And then the other side, we actually, JM builds a little wooden housing on the back of the piece that we glue the other side of the magnet. So there's two different poles, there's two different magnets. And it has a little bit of a lip so that the one that's screwed on the wall, it'll attach to it and just nest right in there. And it's amazingly secure. They're crazy. As a matter of fact, this little guy, I can show you. Look at that. Here's my little, yeah. Isn't that cool?
It's fabulous. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the housing, and there's the, that you can see how thick it is. And the polymer is only, a very thin edge. And this is almost all painted wood on this. This is plywood, but I can just stick it on there and exactly it's right in the right place. The magnets are wonderful.
It's great.
Science. Yes.
Do you have any photos of the bracelet armature before adding polymer? Probably at this point, it's like
no, there could be a scrolling to me. Find out. Okay. Yeah, it's like most of those bracelets only have, it's probably 10 gauge nickel silver wire soldered, but the main body of it is this 2-part epoxy sculpt clay, which is just really cool stuff. You can, when you work, it's like epoxy, there's 2 parts, you work it together, it hardens over an hour or 2-hour time. And once it's hardened, you can file it and shape it. And then we're laying polymer clay veneers over it and firing it. And it goes in the oven great. It does not move. It does not change shape. It's like the missing link between the materials for us. Yeah, really cool stuff. Yeah.
Wow. You're getting so many. Love your brain. Jeannie loves her butterfly brooches from.
Oh, she has a bug collection. Yes, she do.
Yeah. Oh boy, does she. Question. How do you attach the polymer wall pieces to wood backing?
They're glued down with we use Roo glue, ROO Roo glue, which is a glue for plastics. There's lots of glues for plastics. It's rolled on both surfaces, and then we put it in the veneer press, which is like a giant Ziploc bag with an air pump that sucks the air out of it. And it just sucks down over the whole surface and all the contours, and it holds those pieces together. And after about an hour, that is dried, and you roll it on. So there's very little squeeze out, and that's what we use to glue polymer to wood. Furniture, wall pieces, all the same. Yeah. And it's a vinyl adhesive.
Just so many inspiring people asked if you work 60 hours a week. You have such a huge body of work.
2 hands, the 4 hands, excuse me. Yeah, but yeah, we've worked a lot.
Someone asked if your class at our school in May, they will learn how to use the clay with metal.
No,
That's
that
just beginning
class, just beginning, because it's really, I can teach you how to make the jewelry, but if you don't have those juicy patterns, it's really, you feel like you're missing something. So I wanted to offer beginning polymer classes to people who, there are a lot of local guilds, but people don't always join those. And I really wanted to introduce it to the metal community a little bit more incrementally. And I just really want to share polymer with people because it's very interesting with metal. And a lot of polymer people have been hesitant to do their own metal work. And it's like, oh, you don't even have to solder. You could just work hard and hammer things and start to use it as an armature. So this is a really beginning class, just learning how to make two different types of patterns with a cane technique, but actually I show you how to make a whole bunch of patterns from those patterns. So it's like stripes and circles, and then, you know, a bunch of other ways you can make patterns with just the stripes and circles. And if you just do that, that will launch you into some really fun patterns that then you can go and do all kinds of other things with. So that's what the class is.
And we're hoping to have a more advanced class later.
Yep.
Later on. So did you say double layer of polymer front and back jewelry pieces would total 1/16 of an inch?
All right. I would say that the total thickness, I gotta look at my ruler. Oh yeah, it's very, you know, yeah, it's very thin. It's easily a 1/16 of an inch. It's like two lasagna noodles put together. That's how thick it is with the wire in between. I've gotten really used to work. See, so one of the tricks with what I do is that when I create all these patterns, and like you saw in that one picture when I pulled that drawer open, when I showed you my drawers, I have sheets and sheets of pattern. And once that I put that all to, you know, rolled it out to the same thickness, it sort of cools down and becomes leathery. It's not so floppy and gummy, which it is when you first start working with it. So I'm able to pick up and move all kinds of pieces once it is of a certain consistency, and it stays like that for easily almost like a year. Starts to get stiffer over time, but there's a certain range when it's really pliable, but not too soft. And I can work really thin, and I've gotten used to working with it pretty thin, and that's just how I work. But you don't have to do that. You could work thicker, but once it starts getting past, like, I don't know, quarter to half an inch, after it gets past a half an inch thick, you can have troubles with cracking when you fire it. So when I'm doing layers, I am working thin and adding one layer and another layer, but that prevents that problem from the thickness.
And one last question, and you'll have to look at the chat when you have a chance.
I will.
Thank yous. Can you fire wood covered pieces, and do you have to drill, texture, or give the wood some tooth to stick the clay to?
No, we don't put wood in the oven. When we first did a fish lamp, we tried having a fiberboard like body and veneering it, but it expands and contracts at a very different rate than the polymer clay. So the wood will get bigger as it heats up, but not as the same rate as the polymer. So it will create tension and crack. So no, we never fire on the wood in an oven. We glue it down, or we're working on forms. I did use forms to make the vessels, and I was using something called balsa foam, which a toy prototype maker showed me. And it's like this, it is a phenolic foam, which means it's this weird foam that you can actually, it comes in different densities. It comes in very dense. They make parts that they cast in plastic from this, but they use it to make their models, and you could like make very sharp detail on it. So I used these big blocks of that to make those lampshade and vessel forms. It's kind of weird stuff. It has some kind of weird acid in it, so your tools will start to rust. You know, like, what is this? You know, what strange science have I stepped into now? But it was great for making forms, but I had to cover them with foil, and I had to put a release on it to be able to pop these big vessels and lampshades off of it. So kind of interesting, you know, a whole lesson in mold making. And anytime, the bigger you get with polymer clay, the more that thing will flex and a slump in the oven. So it always has to be supported. These really small structures in jewelry, you could slide a piece of paper underneath it, a piece of, you know, some fiber fill, because that doesn't ignite in the oven at 260 degrees. And so you can support structures that would normally sort of slump when they're fired, because polymer clay does get soft, but the bigger you get, the more weight you have, the more support you need. So there's this whole thing with scale with polymer clay that you sort of learn through, you know, making mistakes.
Right. Well, this, Bonnie, this was fabulous.
Thank you.
I'm so inspired. Just, you have such amazing body of work, and I'm really excited about your class. And
Thanks.
I hope that some of you are able to take it and take advantage of the sale. So thank you again, Bonnie, so
You're
much for
most
being
welcome.
here and for doing this. We
Yeah.
really appreciate it. And thank you all for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
Hope to
Appreciate
see
Thank
everybody's
you,
interest.
thank you, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you. Bye, Not.
Bye.
Bye, Joe.
Bye.
Hi, Bonnie.
Bye.
Great to see you.
Oh, it's so good to see everybody.
Okay.
Hi, Dina.
Oh, I think Dina's trying to talk.
Oh, Gina,
Oh.
unmute yourself.
Yeah. There you are.
I forgot. I was just telling Bonnie, because I do know Bonnie, that I had told